right, new bro.
Books. Books. Books.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that today lingers half agony and half hope. My name is Kayleigh Hughes. I am a writer, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Grace Todd, a writer, editor, and pencil pusher with ideas above her station.
Fancy.
I know. I'm trying to ascend into the upper classes, but I'm already married, so I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to execute this maneuver.
You may have to kill some men.
I'm fine with that. As was Austen, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes they gotta go so you can move up.
Based on some of the details in this book. Not a lot of respect going around for the 18th century dudes. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
What book is it, Grace?
Today, we are talking about Jane Austen's 1818 classic, Persuasion.
Magnificent. That is a book that I absolutely have not read. So in this case, I'm the didn't read it.
You're the...
It's me.
It's me.
I'm
It's
the problem.
me. I didn't read it. It's me. Now, I believe, Kayleigh, you have seen the movie, the newest movie, right?
Yeah, I watched the Netflix adaptation in which Dakota Johnson talks to you, the viewer.
In true Austen style.
But I haven't read the book at all, although I suspect that quote that I used at the beginning is from it.
What? You know, I think it might be. And what else do you know about Austen, sort of like, what are your cultural touch points for Austen, kind of broadly?
Well, as a woman who is 31 at present, I know so much about Jane Austen, much of which I acquired against my will. So, Regency era, right?
Georgian, I think.
Georgian, okay.
Yeah. Wait, hang on. Georgian, yeah. Regency is, God, I always, and this is terrible for someone who used to professionally review romance novels.
Yeah.
But I always mix up Regency and Georgian. Regency, oh gosh, come with us on an adventure. Oh no, Regency was 1811 to 1820.
My touch point for Regency is high-waisted that goes right under the boobs.
The empire dress,
Yeah, the empire dress. And that's always in the Jane Austen film adaptations. And so I just default to, that's Regency because it looks like they're wearing sleeping gowns all the time.
That's Regency, baby. Okay, so very quick fun subset. I had forgotten. The Regency era is a subset of the Georgian era because the Georgian era was the reign of King George III, who was also very mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And so there is a period of his reign where he was too mentally ill to be in charge.
So there was a regent!
Hey! Bow, bow, bow.
Enter, regent.
So Jane Austen was in the Georgian era mostly because the Regency spanned from 1811 to 1820. Thank you, Wikipedia. Well, it came out in 1818, but she was dead by the time it was published.
Okay. Oh, cool. R.I.P.
R.I.P. Persuasion was actually published posthumously. So there we go. Accidentally roped that in.
Then you'd love this podcast.
This was her. We miss you, Jane.
I don't know if we do. Sure we do. You seemed fine. What I know is you're very smart and savvy about culture and class and the ways that people communicate and don't communicate and how to be proper and how to be improper and the ways that influences whether people can be in love or not.
Yeah, I mean, she was a truly astonishing, her talent for drawing character and for drawing lifelike characters is so incredible as to be like one of the most notable examples of all time, and then even more so in her era. She was so good at it, and Persuasion is probably her best work in that regard, and also possibly her best work generally. I think of it as her most mature novel, and I say that as if I'm the only person who thinks that. Lots of people think it's her most mature novel.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear what it's about. Persuade me that I understand the plot of Persuasion.
There we go. So, As I'm sure you are familiar with because of the film, our main character, although I saw someone argue that she's not technically the protagonist, which is interesting, and we'll get to that later. But our main character, the person who we spend the most time with, is Anne Elliot.
Right. Sweet Anne.
Sweet, sweet Anne. Poor Anne. And I didn't even notice this until I was rereading it this time. Poor Anne doesn't even get to open her own book.
Sorry, Anne.
She doesn't show up until like several pages in. We instead open with her father, Sir Walter of Kellynch Hall, who thinks he is the prettiest man who ever existed.
Aw, that sounds annoying.
He's awful. He's a total nightmare human. So Sir Walter's absolute favorite thing to read, and this is the first thing we learn about him, is the Book of Baronets.
I don't know what any of that means.
Yeah, well, there's no reason anyone would. In this time period, they published like bound volumes, like an index
Okay.
of every member of the aristocracy.
But
with-
not their phone number.
No,
Mm.
they weren't enabling oldie-timey telemarketing. I guess they technically published their addresses, though.
Did
But-
they?
Yeah, because...
So it's essentially like a phone book for all the rich and influential?
Yeah, so it's Walter Elliot, born March 1st, 1760, married July 15th, 1784. Elizabeth, daughter of James Stevenson, Esquire of South Park in the county of Gloucester, by which lady, who died 1800, he has issue Elizabeth, born June 1st, 1785, Anne, born August 9th, 1787, a stillborn son, November 5th, 1789, Mary, born November 20th, 1791.
Okay.
Yep.
So he reads his own entry?
Uh-huh, it's his favorite thing to do.
Cute.
His absolute favorite thing to do is to just sit around looking at his own entry in the Book of Baronets. And the other thing we learn about him immediately is it says that in the entry he had inserted, quote, most accurately, the date of the death of his wife. And I have always wondered if the note that it was most accurate is in a faint tone of surprise.
Oh. Like, we're honestly pleased and impressed that this man remembered when his wife died.
Uh-huh. He's that kind of guy. And Walter has never remarried. And this is a problem because he is catastrophically bad with money.
He sounds so great.
And he is in severe money trouble.
Cool.
The man is about to go bankrupt.
And this is because he buys, like, too many petit fours and stuff.
Too many servants. This was a problem a lot of the aristocracy were in this time period, which is those giant estates are really, really expensive to run. And the economy was in the process of shifting.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, to an industrial...
Pre-industrial, but the middle class was definitely growing dramatically and quite fast, which is definitely one of the things that is kind of an undertone in this book, because a lot of these estates kind of date back to late feudalism sort of stuff.
Okay.
I don't want to go out on too much of a limb here, but
There were the wealthy and important, and then there was the trash. And now there's increasingly in this setting people that like live modestly and comfortably, kind of on their own terms.
yeah, lawyers, shopkeepers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All of which is to say, Walter's a fucking moron. And one of the points that Jane Austen makes over and over and over in this book is that dudes are dummies.
Amen.
And in the absence of an intelligent woman, they don't know how to manage their own stuff, including their money.
So in this family, Elizabeth is not that intelligent woman, and Mary is not that intelligent woman. It is Anne.
And literally no one ever speaks to Anne, so there's nothing she can do about the situation.
Got it.
Her father addresses her directly maybe 3 times in this book. It's real sad. So the moral of the story is Walter never remarried, which means that there's no woman rattling around the place to try and like rein him in. And he's been mismanaging their money to the point where he either has to break up and sell the estate or lose it. And he refuses to do either.
Cool.
And what is finally settled on instead is that it's going to be rented out
Rental. Sounds rough.
to an ascending member of the middle class. Concerning.
Someone else gets to touch all of that stuff.
When they're talking about renting it, he says something about the rights of the prospective tenant. And he says something like, I have never liked the thought of my shrubberies being approachable.
Same. You know what? Same. I'm going to put that on a pair of underwear.
Don't approach my shrubbery.
Yeah. Or maybe like a little shrubbery is now approachable. Like you can change it in and out for when your shrubbery is approachable or not.
The shrubbery is in to be approached.
Yeah.
So the way the novel breaks the three girls down from their father's perspective is that Elizabeth had succeeded at 16 to all that was possible of her mother's rights and consequence, and being very handsome and very like himself, they had gone on together most happily. His two other children were of very inferior value. Mary had acquired a little artificial importance by becoming Mrs. Charles Musgrove, but Anne was nobody with either her father or her sister. Her word had no weight. She was only Anne.
God, this is dark.
Yeah. Like, there are all of these little margin notes in my copy of this book that are just me going like, Anne, no.
In Barbie parlance, the Elliots are everything. She's just Anne.
She is just Anne. And it's very sad.
And she's our protagonist. She's the one where we're like, yay, to whatever happens to her.
Yeah, because she's, especially with this setup, Anne is kind of standing in as like the platonic ideal of a woman of her class. Like she is sensible where her father is a spendthrift. She is the right kind of proud where her sister is just vain and stupid.
Okay.
She's nurturing and thinks about others where her other sister is an objectively terrible mother and incredibly selfish.
Awesome. Women's rights and women's wrongs, you know?
And so this is a lot of like stage setting because the way the novel's broken down, the first chunk is like very, very dense with a bunch of information so that you kind of learn everything that's happening and then it can just cruise into the drama of it all.
Okay.
So in a desperate bid to keep Walter from going completely bankrupt, they decide to rent out the house and move to Bath.
Bath.
And the other thing that we learn is that Elizabeth, oldest daughter, at one point, it had seemed like she was probably going to marry the actual heir to the estate, which is not any three of them, right? Because they're women.
Yeah, fuck those bitches.
The actual heir to the estate is Walter's nephew, William.
Incestuous.
Indeed. Elizabeth was absolutely convinced that she was going to marry William. And then, without any warning, he vanished. And then, when he reappeared, he was married to a very rich woman with no title and was apparently running around talking about how much he hated them all.
Zoinks.
Which wounded her pretty badly in terms of her pride. And she's never been approached since.
Ugh, but she's even handsome.
Well, and it's hard to tell if Elizabeth is not being approached because she sucks, which is very funny. And Walter's whole obsession with the estate is that it needs to be passed on to the male heir intact as he received it, right? Like there's all this stuff about inheritance going on here. And very pointedly, he's obsessed with making sure that the estate goes intact to this nephew of his who has offended the family pretty grievously. And in preserving the estate intact when he is cash poor, he is kind of robbing his daughters of anything.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Because if he sold the estate, as an example, and converted it to cash, he could leave his daughters cash.
Oh, how nice that would be.
But instead,
it's like every acre of this shrubbery remains unapproachable.
especially to you, my three daughters,
Yeah.
two of whom are unmarried,
Off these shrubs.
who can go straight to hell. If he dies while they're still unmarried, they become William's dependents. And he clearly doesn't care about them at all, which means that they could wind up literally with no money and nowhere to go.
So they're in a very precarious situation, and is the atmosphere then like things are just like everyone's stressed?
Everyone is stressed, but not for those reasons because they're morons.
They're just stressed because like they may have to fire some servants.
Because they have to fire some servants and they are going to move to Bath. That is the solution that is landed on, which everyone is a big fan of, except Anne, who hates Bath.
What's the deal with Bath?
Because she went there twice in her life. First, when she was sent away to school right after her mother died, where she apparently had a very bad time. She's about 14.
So the schoolgirls didn't like Anne either.
It sounds like she had friends at school, but like she was reeling from her mother's death. She's having a bad time. It was the first time she was away from home.
Yeah, okay.
And then the second time she was in Bath was the winter where she was recovering from having broken off her engagement to Captain Frederick Wentworth.
Enter romance. So Anne is in a state of heartbreak still? Or no? How long ago was this engagement break off?
8 years.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. So we find out that Anne at one point had been engaged to and deeply, deeply in love with a man named Frederick Wentworth, who was then a young man and in the Navy, and was persuaded.
All right.
There it is. And I mean, I'm guessing I am certain that most of this, with maybe some of the nuance stripped out, is in the movie. But Anne was engaged 8 years earlier to Frederick Wentworth and was persuaded, mostly by her friend Lady Russell, to give up the engagement. And there's a quote here just to drive home over and over and over again how sad Anne's life is. Their first blush of romance, which was, he was at that time a remarkably fine young man with a great deal of intelligence, spirit, and brilliancy, and Anne an extremely pretty girl, with gentleness, modesty, taste, and feeling. Half the attraction on either side might have been enough, for he had nothing to do, and she had hardly anybody to love.
Jesus Christ.
But such recommendations could not fail. They were rapidly and deeply in love.
So Austen is essentially saying, like, even if they weren't attracted to each other or, like, had anything in common and just needed someone to love, she would have projected that onto a random fucking pelican if it was, nearby and gave her some attention.
It's heartbreaking. Austen emphasizes over and over again, like, Anne is just so unloved by her family. She's treated like furniture.
This sounds like a Charles Dickens story.
Oliver Twist featuring Anne Elliot.
Yeah.
And so when Anne and Frederick first fall in love and announce their engagement, or more accurately, when Frederick asks Walter for permission to marry Anne, Walter refuses to give her a dowry. Which is, I feel like it's easy from the perspective of now to downplay a dowry, but going back to the whole Walter dying and leaving the girls with nothing, that's her right. That's really her only inheritance, right? Because she's being merged into her theoretical husband's household. That is her prerogative. It's not like a nice bonus. It's what she is due from her family.
Yeah, it's a way of giving an inheritance when the legal rules of the time don't allow you to have a girl inherit your estate. But he would never think of it that way because this guy's really selfish.
It even says that Anne would have been able to kind of truck it through Walter's refusal to give them a dowry, or at least that she would have tried to. But Lady Russell is the person that Anne really can't resist. And Lady Russell was like her mom's best friend. Who, after her mother died, kind of stepped in as a maternal figure and Lady Russell is Anne's only friend. She's the only person who thinks of her, who considers her, who values her in any meaningful fashion. And Lady Russell is vehemently opposed to this engagement.
So why is Wentworth such bad news?
I have a quote. To throw herself away at 19 in an engagement with a young man who had nothing but himself to recommend him, and no hopes of attaining affluence, in a most uncertain profession and no connections, would be indeed a throwing away, which Lady Russell grieved to think of. Anne Elliot, so young, known to so few, to be snatched off by a stranger, and sunk by him into a state of most wearing, anxious, youth-killing dependence. Wentworth had always been lucky. He knew he should be so still. Such confidence, powerful in its own warmth, must have been enough for Anne, but Lady Russell saw it very differently. His fearlessness of mind operated very differently on her. It only added a dangerous character. He was brilliant. He was headstrong. Lady Russell had very little taste for wit, and of anything approaching imprudence, a horror.
So Wentworth sounds sexy.
Wentworth is a hottie.
And it sounds like Lady Russell is very involved in Anne and wants to make choices for her. And is the only person Anne has to bounce things off. Like, she's her only confidant. She's her only source of advice. Anne is a young person who spent her entire life living on this estate, kind of tucked away. They don't know anyone. And everyone else is like, oh, if Anne were thrown away, that would be fine because we already consider her trash.
Yeah, pretty much. And what Lady Russell succeeds in doing is convincing Anne that the engagement is not just the wrong thing for her, but for both of them. And that it's not just the wrong thing interpersonally, but sort of in terms of her broader honor.
Okay, we're pulling out honor. Pulling out dignity, maybe.
A wrong thing, indiscreet, improper, hardly capable of success and not deserving it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That sounds like something I would charge straight after, but that's another topic for another day.
I mean, I think Austen would be very sympathetic to those of us who go charging after indiscreet, improper, and incapable of success relationships.
You're telling me it's a wrong thing? I'm in.
Take me to him. And so the sort of kicker of all of this, of Anne's broken engagement, is that because Lady Russell convinces Anne that she gets her in the one way that you can really with Anne's otherwise good instincts, which is to convince her that she's doing the best thing for Wentworth.
Ugh.
She's one of those. Anne is one of those people.
Don't love me, I'll only ruin your life.
And she can only give it up because she's convinced it's the best thing for him.
Stay away for your own good.
And then because he's a very headstrong young man who's, going back to that quote, right? He's very confident. He's convinced like he's going to make it. Mm-hmm. Nothing about this engagement is a gamble to him because he is young, he's a hotshot, he's in the Navy, his life has been going well, and he is supremely confident that it will continue to go well. There's no question of whether or not this is a good idea. And she goes to him and says, this was wrong, and it's for your benefit as much as mine. Anne wants him to understand that she is theoretically trying to do the best thing for both of them, and he decides that she is inconstant, doesn't know her own mind, maybe never loved him properly to begin with, and leaves the country, fucks off to the West Indies.
All right.
To go do a colonialism.
I mean, typical.
Anne has been left holding the bag sort of emotionally on top of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the one to incite the breakup, it's always your fault.
Right. And I mean, I think to me, that's one of the things about this that feels very modern is part of Anne's heartbreak is that she doesn't get to be the one who's mad. Mm-hmm. It is in many ways portrayed as being easier on Wentworth in a way because he gets to leave angry at her.
Yeah, I mean, that tracks. He feels very contemporary.
And she's just left at home mourning this relationship with no one to blame but herself, maybe? Mm-hmm. At least as far as she sees it. Because she's certainly not going to blame Lady Russell because, again, Lady Russell is her only friend.
This is so sad.
It is.
Like, it's sad on an emotional level and it's sad on the pathetic level.
Yeah. That's why Anne hates Bath.
Right.
Because in the aftermath of this broken engagement, Lady Russell drags her off to Bath to spend the winter, I think on the idea of like that thing that older relatives will do to you where they're like, you just need to change a scene.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. After my last breakup, my mom took me to the small town vacation that I was meant to go on with him. And she and I had a little romantic weekend and it was supposed to make me feel better.
Did it?
It happened.
It was a thing that occurred.
We did do that and returned, and I'm still here.
Do you now have a lifelong disdain for that small town?
Absolutely.
The way that Anne does for Bath?
Green, Texas.
Oh, so Green, Texas is your Bath. How's the family estate doing? Because I might have bad news for you. So Anne does not want to go to Bath, but her family could not care less about this objection of hers.
Shocking.
And even Lady Russell essentially is like, you'll get over it.
She seems to like Bath.
Lady Russell loves Bath. Lady Russell also is a character that I think gets fairly maligned for her role in this story, but in terms of a character that Austen is presenting to us, I am kind of a Lady Russell stan because she is a rich widow with no children who very emphatically never married again.
Cool.
And is just clearly like living her best life.
Does she get to bone?
I have no idea if she has sex, but it is mentioned a couple of times fairly emphatically that she's super into like modern literature and she's always got books and pamphlets and she's got like a massive social calendar. She's having a great time.
So why is she so invested in ruining Anne's life?
Because she doesn't think she's ruining Anne's life. And there's a bunch of stuff in here too about like generational divides, which we'll touch on more when we get to the Musgroves in just a second. But Lady Russell is old school and Anne is much younger. And Austen is definitely kind of exploring the differences between these two things. And so for Lady Russell, like to prioritize happiness over security is just so patently stupid that she has almost no time for it.
Yeah, it's a different time.
So we're about to head off to Bath and Anne is given a sort of stay of execution at the 11th hour. Because her youngest sister, Mary, anticipates being very unwell in the coming fall.
Okay.
And anytime Mary is out of sorts, Anne, as the furniture/glorified servant of the family, is expected to go stay at Uppercross with Mary and Charles, her husband, to act as Mary's sort of companion, pseudo-nursemaid, assistant governess.
And is Mary's illness the kind where it's like, oh, I must faint from overexhaustion from eating too fast or some shit?
It's, she just convinces herself she's sick all the time. While properly attended to, Mary had good humor and excellent spirits, but any indisposition sunk her completely, and she had no resources for solitude. Having inherited a considerable share of the Elliot self-importance, she was prone to fancying herself neglected and ill-used.
Cool.
And anytime it happens, she demands that Anne come and cater to her.
Love it.
The last thing that happens before Walter and Elizabeth are shuffled out of the way is Mary demands use of Anne, and Elizabeth replies with, "Then I am sure Anne had better stay, for nobody will want her in Bath."
Jesus Christ. This is not subtle.
No, it's not. So we shuffle Elizabeth and Walter off along with Mrs. Clay, who is Elizabeth's middle-class friend who is very obviously trying to get Walter to marry her. It was a little bit of attempted social climbing, and no good.
No good?
No good.
Because she's middle class?
Because she's tacky.
Tacky. And there's a bit of an age difference, I imagine.
Yeah.
Which is totally fine, I guess, back then.
Yes. 100%. They did not care. Anne and Lady Russell are hoping that Mrs. Clay will stay behind, and instead Elizabeth takes Mrs. Clay with her, and she's like, I couldn't stand being alone in Bath. And Lady Russell's like, Anne is right there.
Jesus.
And Elizabeth's like, not you.
You're worse than being alone.
Anne Elliot, worse than solitude. The way the novel is constructed, it's kind of broken into like 4 big location-based set pieces. Kellynch Hall, prior to the move to the Bath, is where we establish the dynamic of the core family. And then Anne is shuffled over to Uppercross, where we learn about her sister Mary and Charles and his family, the Musgroves.
Okay.
So Mary married Charles Musgrove. Mary married Charles Musgrove.
By the seashore.
There's also there are 2 Charleses in this book, and I really wish Jane had maybe
There's more names, Jane.
thrown around some other names, because it does get very confusing because the 2 Charleses are cousins in the same anyway. So Mary. This is a tongue twister. So the Musgrove family are upper middle class. Like, they're not as fancy as the Elliots. They're not titled. They do have land. They have Uppercross, which is like a big old estate. And the Musgroves are presented as very warm, a little tacky, but like charming.
Oh, so like a cool family.
Yeah, it's the Musgroves are in a state of alteration, perhaps of improvement. The father and mother were in the old English style, and the young people in the new. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove were friendly and hospitable, not much educated, and not at all elegant. Their children had modern minds and manners, unembarrassed and pleasant. Anne considered them as some of the happiest creatures of her acquaintance. But still, saved as we all are by some comfortable feeling of superiority from wishing for exchange, she would not have given up her more elegant and cultivated mind for all their enjoyments.
Wow, that got harsh really quickly. But they're dumb.
I mean, they are idiots, but they're sweeties. I included that second line for 2 reasons, which is, one, I think that's true, right? If we're honest with ourselves, whomst among us does not know people that we genuinely love, but like would not want to be?
I guess. I kept thinking like, this sounds like my family, but then we're smart.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be because of perceived intellect. I don't know. One of the things I like about this novel is that Anne gets to have opinions about people that are not always super flattering, but she doesn't act on them, right? Mm-hmm. Like, she's a discerning young lady, and the Musgroves are not the brightest, but they're sweet, and that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes Anne seem less saintly to have these kind of snobby opinions.
I feel like we are broadly kind of unused to unflattering opinions, not necessarily indicating that someone is a bad person broadly.
Yeah.
Anne has lots of funny, like...
Right. You mean she's a character of nuance?
So yeah, I mean, Anne doesn't want to be the Musgrove sisters.
Right.
But she loves the Musgrove sisters, genuinely. Henrietta and Louisa, who are Charles's sisters, who are both single, younger than Anne, and primarily interested in like dancing and meeting young men, and they're just kind of flighty, high energy.
Funsies.
And the Musgroves have a pack of children.
Okay.
There are so many Musgroves. They clearly love each other and prove it
And don't have any animal-made
frequently.
condoms.
But the only children who are named are Charles, Henrietta, and Louisa. The smaller children are just there being loud. Imagine like a big, noisy house with comfortable furniture.
Yeah.
That is just full of children and servants and guests.
Seems dope.
Yeah, it sounds great. And Anne loves it. The Musgroves treat her slightly less like furniture.
Wow. What praise.
Yeah, she moves in with Mary, who is an objectively terrible mother and is constantly complaining about her children not respecting her, and also complaining about having to spend time with them, and also complaining about having to like miss social engagements so that they can be taken care of. She's just not, she would have been happier maybe if she had managed to dodge the childbearing portion of
Yeah.
18th century wifehood.
Great.
Do
we ever get to meet our sexy hero?
Anne shows up at Uppercross. Mary is a nightmare. And then we find out that the family who have rented her old house, the ancestral estate, Kellenshall, are Admiral and Mrs. Croft, who are delightful and I love them, and I will explain them more later.
Cool.
But Mrs. Croft's brother is coming to visit, and his name is Frederick Wentworth.
Do the Crofts know about this? Like, drama of the past?
So no one knows about Anne and Wentworth's engagement, who is currently on the scene.
Oh man, what a miserable coincidence.
The only three people who are aware are Walter, Elizabeth, and Lady Russell, and they're all gone. Mary was away at school at the time, and Frederick clearly never told his sister. So Frederick Wentworth arrives on the scene, and Anne is like, oh, shit, oh,
She gets no breaks. Great.
She just like panics. The book is written in essentially like omniscient narration, but we spend the most time in Anne's head. And one of the things that Austen does that I think is great and also very modern is that Anne kind of lies to herself, not infrequently. And you can see it happening. And so she just does all this stuff where she's just like, I'm fine. I'm not fine. I'm fine. The first few times that he's supposed to arrive on the scene, because, you know, you're a bunch of rich people living on estates in the countryside. When someone new comes to town, the first thing you do is you just all start visiting each other.
Party, dinner, dancing.
So the first couple of times he is supposed to visit, she just happens to, like, take a walk. And then finally she gets ambushed because Mary's husband, Charles, is an absolute himbo.
Great.
He's just a very simple man who wants to like ride horses and shoot guns and go hunting with his dogs. It is very obvious that he hears about Captain Wentworth and is like, all right, new bro.
Cute.
And it's thoroughly possible that Charles has the first and strongest crush on Wentworth out of anyone in the Musgrove family.
Dudes rock.
And so Mary and Anne are having breakfast, and Charles is dudes rocking all over the place and just like kind of comes barreling into the house and is like, yeah, Frederick and I are going to like go shooting, and I just came back to get the dogs, and also he's going to come say hi, but he wanted to make sure we wasn't going to like interrupt you. So like, he'll be here in a second. Bye. And just like...
Okay, so he kind of sounds great. And like the only person that could tolerate Mary.
100%. And it's because he does not care. Anytime she pisses him off, he just gets like sulky and then drifts away.
Babe, I'm going to go stand next to some horses for a little while.
Pretty much, yeah. He just does not engage, which is what you have to do, I think, with people like Mary. And so they meet for the first time, and Anne gets through it, and they just sort of don't talk to each other.
Are they both still hot?
So, speaking of Anne not being able to catch a break, Charles's sisters Henrietta and Louisa are immediately like, hell yeah, naval captain in the neighborhood. One of us is going to marry this man. Just full stop. Henrietta, Louisa, and Mary all go hang out with Captain Wentworth because he's everywhere, and Anne is successfully avoiding him by staying behind to nurse her injured nephew because Mary does not care about her own children, even a little. And Mary comes back and is like, man, Frederick Wentworth really isn't very nice about you. He said that since he saw you last, you're so changed he wouldn't have recognized you.
Wow. What a dick.
And
He doesn't mean it. I don't think he means it.
I don't think he means it but also like, what a dick of Mary to repeat it.
Oh, I mean, at this point, I gather that Mary just like stumbles around holding a martini and like causing a fuss.
Mary is a consummate wine mom.
Awesome.
Just 1818 wine mom all over the place. And of course, Anne can't show how much this wounds her.
Yeah.
Because Mary doesn't know that they have any history.
Mary doesn't even know.
So Mary is just repeating nasty comments for no reason.
Oh, I kind of love her. She's just chaos.
She is chaos incarnate, and she's so mean. Anne fully submitted in silent, deep mortification, and she could take no revenge, for he was not altered or not for the worse. The years which had destroyed her youth and bloom had only given him a more glowing, manly, open look. He had thought her wretchedly altered. He had not forgiven Anne Elliot. She had used him ill, deserted and disappointed him. And worse, she had shown a feebleness of character in doing so.
This is brutal. And also, like, of course, the guy just gets hotter and hotter as he ages. I'm sure he's like salt and pepper now.
I know, right? One of the things that happens as a result, I think, of this being Austen's most mature novel is there's not a little bit of like, what the hell, man? Why do daddies get to be so daddy?
What are the ways she's been ruined by time? Punched in the face by the years is what do they say?
Wretchedly altered. By the way, bearing in mind this haggard old woman is 27. Yeah. She might as well give up and die alone.
Maybe he didn't recognize her because there was no skin on her face because she was an actual skeleton.
The important conclusion here is she's like, oh, he hates me.
Yeah.
He's back. I have to deal with him, and he hates me.
Oh, I hate when a hot person hates you.
Because he's going around telling people how haggard I look, which is...
That's so mean. He's hurt.
Yeah, he is lashing out in true straight dude fashion. And now she's stuck with him because all the Musgroves are in love with him.
Right, so they want him around all the time.
So he's there all the time, hitting on Henrietta and Louisa in front of her.
I'm sorry, I sympathize with Anne, but it's also like almost, it's so comedic how hard she gets dunked on.
Yeah, it is comedically brutal. And I think that's in there. It is a little bit like Anne Elliot and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad social season. There's a whole scene where she just, because of geography and accident, is just sort of stuck listening while Wentworth talks to Louisa about how important it is to have a woman that doesn't change her mind.
Wow, he's really going hard.
And he's just telling Louisa how hot and admirable she is for being like a lady who knows her own intentions.
You know what the absolute worst thing in the world is? When a girl changes her mind.
Pretty much. And Anna's just like, well, might as well go die, I guess. A part of me thinks she would have walked into a lake if it weren't for two kind of subtle things that make her wonder if maybe he doesn't hate her quite as much as it seems. The only two things that keep it from being completely ungovernable is the first happens when she is, again, stuck taking care of her nephew because Mary is useless. And one of her other nephews, who's described as a physically imposing toddler.
Oh, cute.
He sounds kind of terrified. Yeah. Like the way they describe me just sounds like a little truck.
Like the baby in Rugrats, which I don't think you ever watched.
And I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Okay.
And he's physically climbing on her, and she's trying to get him to get off, and he won't. And the other Charles, cousin Charles, who's supposed to be marrying Henrietta and is mad at everyone because now Henrietta's being hit on by Wentworth, or more accurately, Henrietta's hitting on Wentworth, is in the room but won't do anything about it. He just leaves her on her own because men are useless. It's written very closely from her perspective, and you can kind of feel that she's starting to feel like suffocated and kind of overwhelmed. And wordlessly, Wentworth walks over, picks the child up off of her back, takes it across the room, and like starts to entertain it. Him, sorry.
Well, that's a tell.
Yeah, it's just like this little wordless act of service, which Jane Austen is so good at. And she's like, maybe he doesn't hate me. Because, again, this woman has been starved for any scrap of affection.
Right. Someone removed a toddler from my shoulder.
Someone remembered I wasn't a chair. And then the second is that on that same walk where she's listening to him basically talk shit about her obliquely, Charles, her brother-in-law, is kind of supposed to be giving his arm to her and Mary to support them because they are probably tired after all of this walking. But Mary keeps pissing him off. So he keeps kind of shaking Mary off, and then she starts complaining, so he just shakes them both off. And Anne is exhausted, and they run into Admiral and Mrs. Croft, the world's happiest married couple, who are out in their carriage, and stop and ask if anyone wants a ride home. Wentworth, who has clearly noticed how tired Anne is, steps up and has a word, and then just, like, deposits her in the carriage.
He noticed she was tired? How long are these country walks?
Miles and miles.
Ugh.
And also, you know, they're probably all kind of anemic.
Yeah.
She was in the carriage and felt that he had placed her there, that his will and hands had done it, and his resolution to give her rest. She understood him. He could not forgive her, but he could not be unfeeling.
God, that's sad. She needs to get a spine.
Anne Elliot, do something for yourself challenge.
1818.
Difficulty level impossible. The one important thing that Wentworth learns, for his part, in all of this upper cross socializing, is that Anne is single on purpose.
Oh.
Because Mary's husband, Charles, the gun himbo, proposed to Anne first.
Oh my God.
And she turned him down, much to the disappointment of all of the Musgroves.
Maybe everything would have been better if Anne was just off with a himbo.
Off with Charles the himbo.
Yeah. She's like being smart and quiet. He's doing his man stuff and opposites attract. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And there's a bunch of other cousin-y stuff that I'm just going to gloss over very fast because there are so many cousins in Jane Austen books. Everything is cousins. It's 90% cousins.
That's England.
The population of all of England is cousins.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say, Henrietta's kind of shuffled off the field of battle, and Wentworth and Louisa are seeming like a sure thing until, inexplicably, they all take a beach trip together.
Oh.
To Lyme.
Hello, Lyme.
They go to visit some of Wentworth's friends from the Navy, who are dear hearts.
Cute.
The Harvilles, Mr. and Mrs. Harville, and Captain Benwick, who is a consummate 1818 sad boy.
Yes.
Because his fiancée died during a very long engagement.
So he's really passionate about Byron.
He is. He is big into poetry.
Great.
Like, he spends all of his time just being sad and reading poetry.
God, love it. Honestly, sounds perfect for Anne.
And it kind of seems like Benwick and Anne are going to have like a little thing. They sit around and chat about poetry. She's apparently the only person who can get him to talk.
Yeah, it seems great. They should cry into each other's mouths in a sexy way.
Ew.
I don't know.
That image suddenly struck me so viscerally.
I revealed too much about myself. Keep going.
One very big thing happens in Lyme, but before we get to that, we do also, for the first time, meet the heir to the estate,
Oh, the boy.
William Elliot.
The one who's ruining kind of her financial situation just by existing.
A little bit, yeah.
Cool.
But also who happens to see her when they're like out in the street and she doesn't know who he is yet. This is like the 1818 equivalent of some dude giving you like the hardcore up and down eyes. Anne's face caught his eye, and he looked at her with earnest admiration, which she could not be insensible of. It was evident that the gentleman admired her exceedingly. Captain Wentworth looked round at her instantly in a way that showed his noticing of it. A glance of brightness which seemed to say, "That man is struck with you, and even I, at this moment, see something like Anne Elliot again."
Well, there's a lot of talking from these eyes.
Uh-huh. They're very chatty eyes.
Nobody recognizes each other, even though he was going to marry her sister at one point?
Anne was away at school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Roger.
So they've never met. The moral of the story, though, is that a clearly rich and well-dressed gentleman sees Anne and gives her the old what up eyes. And Wentworth sees this happening, and everyone is full of feelings about it.
Suddenly it's electric.
I think the biggest thing that happens at Lyme for Anne is that she just gets to feel hot again.
Cool. That's good. Good for her. So it turns out she's not been wretchedly disfigured or whatever.
Yeah, and also she gets to feel attractive intellectually, right? She's got random gentlemen giving her the up and down eyes. She's got Captain Benwick wanting to talk about like poetry and literature with her. And she's like, oh, maybe I'm not haggard and doomed to be unloved forever.
Lyme seems like a great place for Anne.
Lyme is an excellent place for Anne. It is not a great place for Louisa.
Oh, no.
So I'm sure you remember this scene from the movie.
Yeah, Louisa's lowest point, literally and metaphorically.
It's so cringe-inducing to read that I can only imagine how uncomfortable it is to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the movie makes her seem like just this absolute love-struck dummy who's, like, making the most embarrassing decisions you would ever make in front of somebody that you were into.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So they're on the seawall, and it's windy, and they're going to go down a flight of steps from the upper part of the seawall to the lower part of the seawall.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, all were content to pass quietly and carefully down the steep flight.
Which is, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It's an amazingly specific thing to point out, only because of what's next. Never would you need to be like, let's note that other people just use the stairs normal.
Other people use the stairs the way stairs are supposed to be used. Excepting Louisa. She must be jumped down them by Captain Wentworth. In all their walks, he had had to jump her from the stiles. The sensation was delightful to her. The hardness of the pavement for her feet made him less willing upon the present occasion. He did it, however. She was safely down, and instantly, to show her enjoyment, ran up the steps to be jumped down again. He advised her against it. But no, he reasoned and talked in vain. She smiled and said, I am determined. I will. He put out his hands. She was too precipitate by half a second. She fell upon the pavement and was taken up lifeless.
God, so humiliating.
It's so bad.
Catch me, Daddy. Catch me again.
Very much that. And then she smashes her head on the cobblestones.
Ah!
And everyone loses their minds.
And Wentworth is like, maybe I do want somebody who changes their mind now and then.
Mary faints. Henrietta faints.
Great.
Anne and Charles between them are trying to hold up Henrietta. Mary's on the ground. It's a mess. None of the men know what to do. The men are all panicking.
Yeah, of course.
And guess who takes charge?
Constant Anne.
Yes, Anne. Our girl. Our genius. Who is apparently the only person with critical thinking skills in this moment. Although Wentworth is a little bit excused because he thinks he's killed Louisa. The first words out of his mouth are like, oh God, her parents.
Yeah.
I've killed this woman. He's convinced he's a murderer, at least for a brief period. And then in a quick aside of, I think, grade A Jane Austen humor, Anne sends Benwick off for a surgeon. She's holding one of the ladies up by herself. She gets them to pick Louisa up. They take her to the Harvilles' house, which happens to be nearby. And as they're trying to kind of get everyone shuffled away, it says, by this time, the report of the accident had spread among the workmen and boatmen about the Cobb, and many were collected near them, to be useful if wanted, and, at any rate, to enjoy the sight of a dead young lady.
Oh my God.
Nay, 2 dead young ladies, for it proved twice as fine as the first report.
Yeah, dead girl!
Because Henrietta's still out cold, and they're like, oh, there's 2 corpses over here. And that, to me, is very funny. So Anne takes charge. Louisa is installed at the Harvilles. Anne wants to stay behind to nurse Louisa because everyone agrees that she would be best at it. And then Mary throws a temper tantrum because she wants to be the one to stay.
So Mary just doesn't want to go back to her kids.
Uh-huh. I do think that's part of it. So the poor Harvilles are now stuck with a severely injured young woman that they are not related to, and Mary. And Anne is shipped back to the Musgroves at Uppercross, along with everyone who isn't Mary, and I think Charles also stays behind. And in the carriage, as you foreshadowed just a minute ago, Anne gets, I think, a wonderfully little bit aside to herself while she's looking at Wentworth, who is in the carriage with them, just being like, oh God, what have I done? She says, Anne wondered whether it occurred to him now to question the justness of his own previous opinion as to the universal advantage of firmness of character, and whether it might not strike him that, like all other qualities, it should have its proportions and limits. She thought it could scarcely escape him to feel that a persuadable temper might sometimes be as much in favor of happiness as a very resolute character.
Love it. Yes. Yeah, so I imagine she didn't say that because that would be way too much, but at least she's thinking it.
Yeah, Anne says almost nothing in this book, but we do get these lovely little trains of thought of hers where you're just like, okay, Anne, I see you. This is really all you get, and we'll let you have it. So then she's shipped off to Uppercross, Louisa's installed at Lyme, Wentworth shuffles himself off the scene, and so that's the end of Lyme and Uppercross. And that is the end, when it was originally published, of the first half of the novel, because it's broken into chunks.
Okay.
What's important here is that, like, we now know who everyone is, what all of their motivations are. Benwick maybe has the hots for Anne. Wentworth and Louisa were in a thing. Anne has been looked up and down by her cousin. We do find out that it's her cousin, but they haven't met yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, after putting it off as long as she possibly can, Anne is shipped off to Bath.
Okay.
And Bath is where everything comes together. All the dramas intersect.
Very full bath.
Yes.
When's it going to get juicy?
Bath is where it gets juicy. Okay. It's very wet. Everything's very wet in Bath.
Moist, juicy, all kinds of yucky stuff.
So Anne turns up in Bath and is immediately embarrassed by Walter and Elizabeth, who have managed to befriend, or more specifically, who have been befriended by William Elliot. He has turned up in Bath and weaseled his way in and appears to be booking it for Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Anne is immediately very suspicious of this.
Well, it went so well the first time.
Anne is trying to figure out to herself why on earth Mr. Elliot, who she still thinks is like a pretty sensible guy, is going after Elizabeth, especially when he already knows her. And she says, Elizabeth's character might never have been penetrated by Mr. Elliot, knowing her but in public and when very young himself. How her temper and understanding might bear the investigation of his present keener time of life was another concern, and rather a fearful one. Most earnestly did Anne wish that he might not be too nice or too observant if Elizabeth were his object.
Is he going to notice how much Elizabeth sucks? How much my sister's just piece of shit?
Just the absolute worst. But then literally Anne walks in. He is like in the process of hitting on Elizabeth, and Anne walks in and he's just like, never mind.
God. Men are trash.
Men are trash. And so he is immediately pursuing Anne, although it's unclear to me how long it takes Anne to figure out that this is what's happening. Because people kind of start to be like, Mr. Elliot's into you. And she's like, no, no, he's not. That definitely isn't what's on his mind. And I can't tell how much of that is genuine, how much of that is her doing what's expected of her, how much of that is her being kind of in denial, but he's after her.
She seems like somebody that would very much downplay any good thing that happened to her.
I think that's definitely fair. He's pursuing her heavily and making himself very much agreeable to her and to the whole family, except for Mrs. Clay, who is still attempting to seduce Walter, which is bad for the family pride mostly.
Right.
One of the things that sets Anne off about him pretty early is that he privately to Anne will be like, man, this whole Mrs. Clay thing is like a problem and we got to get this taken care of. But he's super nice to Mrs. Clay. She basically says like it is a flaw to be that
Two-faced.
Yeah, like that likable. She's like, I don't trust people that everyone likes. If you never slip up, if you never say the wrong thing, that's concerning.
Yeah, he's too slick.
He's too slick, which, you know, I'd say holds. Anne is uncomfortable with William Elliot, but she can't quite put her finger on why, and she starts to kind of second guess her own judgment. Maybe it's fine. Maybe I could come around. And she has a conversation with Lady Russell, who has come back on the scene. And Lady Russell essentially says, he is pursuing you. He's going to propose to you. And Anne, just imagine it. You could be the mistress of Kellynch Hall again.
Your own home.
Yeah. Like you could have your house back, but also you could fulfill your mother's role and sort of your mother's like deepest wish for you, and like this is what I could wish for you. Like you could essentially wrangle the family back from the brink of oblivion.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure to put on Anne.
It is. And it's the only time we see her really tempted by William Elliot. She has to really think about it, but she sticks to her guns. She holds firm. And I say, good for her.
So she's not interested in Mr. Elliot. She refuses to be, even when she's tried to, even when there is an attempt to persuade her.
Uh-huh.
How she has changed.
And I think this is one of those things where it gets a little confusing. And again, I'm not entirely sure how this is presented in the film, but like it gets a little confusing here, I think, for modern sensibilities, because there's this weird interim period where she has decided to herself that she is not interested, but they have had enough closeness that everyone is like pretty well convinced that it's a done thing.
Kind of like with Wentworth and Louisa.
Exactly. Because everyone considers them kind of a done deal from a propriety perspective and from a characterization, like from a storytelling perspective. Anne needs a stronger reason than just, I don't like him.
Oh, that sucks.
To justify shuffling William Elliot out of the way.
Ugh.
You know what I mean, though?
Yeah, no,
like,
it absolutely makes sense. It's just dumb.
Yeah. Both culturally and narratively. It can't just be like, the vibe is off.
Yeah.
Austen, very conveniently for herself and for us, provides an old school friend of Anne's named Mrs. Smith, who turns up to give us all of the hot goss, which is that William Elliot is a nightmare human.
Which, like, Anne could tell.
Which Anne could tell, but now we get receipts.
Yeah.
Mrs. Smith is an infirm widow who's been, like, bedridden and is broke, has lost everything.
Ooh, rough.
She married a rich guy, one of William Elliot's best friends, who was bad at managing money. And William Elliot encouraged him in all of this money mismanagement, and they were running around partying together. And then her husband died and left William Elliot as the executor of the will, which he refused to do properly.
Oh my God.
And so she's been left bankrupt with no friends or social connections. William Elliot has abandoned her.
Ugh, piece of trash.
Yeah.
This Mrs. Smith is not in the movie for what it's worth.
Huh. I mean, I guess, especially when you're trying to shave things down into like a film, I could see how that's like one character too many. Because even just trying to explain it, you're like, oh, there's all these people everywhere, which there always are in Austen novels.
And he's like not quite as much of an enormous villain. Like he's a dirtbag guy, but like the film is like, let him have a romance at the end.
He's a turd.
Yeah.
In the midst of all of this, Anne finds out that Captain Benwick, who was kind of set up as maybe another potential love interest for her,
Yeah, sad boy.
is going to marry Louisa.
Louisa!
Louisa's back.
And she's not linked with Wentworth.
Indeed.
Oh, man.
And everyone is extremely confused.
Okay. So everybody's kind of like, what the fuck?
Yeah, everyone is like, wait, what the hell just happened? Because last we saw Louisa, she and Wentworth were considered essentially engaged by a lot of their friends, and then she threw herself off a wall by accident.
Uh-huh.
It turns out that in the intervening period, when Louisa was being nursed back to health, who was there at her elbow to read her poetry
Ugh.
and gaze at her longingly
Tender Benwick.
to help nurse her back to health?
Oh, wow.
I know. It's
cute.
I think it's actually very cute,
Yeah.
especially because there's an implication of like some maybe like old timey like PTSD or TBI or something that like Louisa is changed.
Oh, interesting.
Like she is a different person. They make a very pointed comment that like anytime there's like a loud, like if a door slams or something, she like jumps. She's fragile now.
Oh, poor dear.
And Benwick has been like, apparently they just sit together all day and he just whispers to her and reads to her and
He's the protector. And
yeah, they're smitten.
That's so cute.
Yeah.
And convenient.
And very convenient because Anne all of a sudden is like, wait, Wentworth is single?
Yes! But she's sort of on the outside, seemingly tied to her piece of shit cousin.
Uh-huh.
Ugh.
Yeah. It continues to be complicated.
Ugh.
And the other thing is that because she's Anne and because she's so hopelessly good, one of her first thoughts is like, oh my God, what if Wentworth is sad about that? Like,
Oh my God.
because she doesn't know, right? She's like, maybe he was really in love with Louisa and now Benwick and Wentworth are going to be mad at each other.
Wow, that is so nice. It hurts.
Yeah. But thankfully we have a plot device in the form of Admiral Croft who swoops in to just be like, what's all this? Then I'm Admiral Croft. Well, I don't know why he's the Cookie Monster. But he kind of swoops in to be like, no, it's all fine. Like, everything is fine. Wentworth and Benwick are the best of friends. We all think this is a little weird and surprising, but no one's done anything wrong. Admiral Croft is a great character because he seems to always know a little bit more than the young people think he does, which I adore. Very Austen. And he, in conversation with her, is like, I think we'd better get Captain Wentworth to Bath. Don't you? And Anne's like, maybe.
I guess that could be nice.
And then, next scene, because this is Jane Austen and we have, places to get, Wentworth is there. He turns up. She's not expecting him. She's out shopping. Her cousin William Elliot is there. She's out with Elizabeth and Mrs. Clay. And we get Elizabeth and Mrs. Clay out of the way, and it doesn't really matter how. And William is supposed to be walking her home, but he vanishes for a minute. And then Wentworth is there, and they have a conversation. And it seems promising. A little. Kind of. And then William comes back and shoves Wentworth out of the way. And she's like, no. No.
And it's not just that Anne is so annoying and spineless, but also that society and propriety don't allow her to be like, I'm not into this guy, marry me.
Right. So this is the situation that sets up the sort of last slide into the big finale is Wentworth is finally properly single. Anne is finally properly single, and she has learned that her cousin is a nightmare, but she hasn't been able to do anything about it yet, and everyone thinks they're engaged.
Ugh.
Anne needs to figure out how to convey to Wentworth that she is not actually going to marry her cousin, and she has no idea how. And so for the first time in the novel, for the first and only time in the novel, Anne takes one very small step to accomplish her own goals.
My God!
The smallest possible step to accomplish her own goals.
Is that Anne Elliot making a move? Barely.
Which is she rearranges a social visit she had planned so that she can go to a concert that she is sure Wentworth will be at.
Sneaky.
That's it. But that is her reclaiming agency.
I mean, we'll take it.
That's as good as it's getting. And she does. And she goes to the concert. But her cousin keeps getting in the way.
Of course.
And she's trying to talk to Wentworth and it seems like things are going really well. And then her cousin keeps butting in and dragging her away and just isn't working out. And Wentworth is very clearly very jealous. And she's like, how do I do this?
And again, I feel like since she's Anne, she's not properly appreciating that oh my God, two boys are fighting over me, even though everyone I love tells me that I look like a trash can.
Yeah, she never really gets a chance to appreciate that, mostly because she goes from he loves me, he really loves me, to, oh God, he thinks I'm marrying someone else, what do I do? And it's just panicking the whole time.
There's so much anticipation at this point in the novel. There's just tension.
Yeah, and the reason that it gets complicated to synopsize at the end is because you get to these last couple of chapters and Austen slows everything way down in order to really draw out this frustrated longing and tension between them.
Which, I mean, what an extremely skillful and tasty thing to do as a writer, but I'm so thirsty.
There's actually an original version of the ending that she replaced that dispatches all of these problems much more quickly. And it is significantly less satisfying emotionally.
Right. It's just and then they were gone, and then they kissed.
So she's desperately trying to figure out what to do about this William Elliot versus Frederick Wentworth situation. She goes to hang out with the Musgroves, and Wentworth turns up. And she, again, is in a tizzy because she's like, you can't just, in 1818, have the object of your affection walk into a room and be like, I love you, you idiot.
Oh.
She's desperately trying to figure out how to tell Wentworth that she loves him. And she winds up in a conversation with Captain Harville about whether men or women love most deeply and love longest.
Yeah, men are not going to win that.
So they get into this whole conversation about the nature of love between men and women. And they go back and forth. They make respectively stirring arguments. But what she lands on, with Wentworth sitting nearby, although not in the conversation, is all the privilege I claim for my own sex. It is not a very enviable one. You need not covet it. Is that of loving longest, when existence or when hope is gone. And Captain Wentworth drops his pen. All the little bits and pieces in the scene are so small. And it's a lot of lingering eye contact and overhearing other people's conversations and being like, oh my God, that means he loves me.
She's sending the signal.
Oh my God, that means she loves me. And Wentworth leaves the room. This is my favorite. So he's been writing a letter. She's been talking to Captain Harville. He and Captain Harville leave the room. She's like, I still have to tell him I love him. I'm doing my best. Like, she's like, did it work? Was that enough? I don't know. There's going to be a party later that night. She's like, okay, I have to make sure he comes to the party. She's like pulling aside Mrs. Musgrove, being like, I need you to make sure that you know that Captain Wentworth knows that he is invited to the party. He has got to come to the party.
Yes, Anne.
She's like, I need to make sure that there has been no miscommunication on this front.
Yes.
And just as that is happening, Captain Wentworth comes running back into the room, being like, I forgot my gloves. He gets in between her and Mrs. Musgrove so that like his back is to Mrs. Musgrove. He slips her a letter and then he leaves again.
So much secrecy.
And the letter is this. I can listen no longer in silence. I must speak to you by such means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. Tell me not that I am too late, that such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own than when you almost broke it 8 years and a half ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman, that his love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you.
Oh my God.
I know. And it keeps going from there, but she's like, oh God. What's happening? But she's still surrounded by the Musgroves, who again are just like very loud and buoyant and excitable people. Mm-hmm. And she can't tell anyone what she's just read because that's not going to fly. So she's like, I don't feel good.
She leaves a puddle in her seat. No one asks questions.
She leaves a massive puddle in her seat and down the back of her empire-waisted dress. And she decides to walk back to the house where Walter and Elizabeth live. Well, I guess where she lives. Charles insists on walking her because he's like, you're not well. You need an escort. She's like, no, I don't. Please leave me alone.
I need alone time.
Please, for the love of God, just leave me alone. But they get out into the street. They are walking down the street. And Frederick Wentworth comes and falls into step beside her. And they don't say anything to each other. And Charles, beautiful himbo Charles, is suddenly like, Wentworth, are you headed this direction?
Oh my God.
Because I had a gun I was trying to go by. Can you walk Anne home?
Oh, does he have no idea?
He has no clue.
Amazing.
And it's my absolute favorite. He's like, there's this guy holding a really cool gun for me, and I really want to go see it. So, like, could you walk her home?
I got to see a man about a gun, but, like, I just actually literally do.
And Anne and Wentworth are finally left alone. They finally know that they love each other. They go into a park, and it all comes spilling out.
Yay!
And they are in love, and everything is fine, and they're going to get married.
We didn't write off the cousin yet.
Which cousin?
The one that she was ostensibly engaged to in the eyes of society.
Well, she knows he's a piece of shit now, so she can turn him down and it's fine.
Oh, she just gets to say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once she knows he's a piece of shit, it's basically like, okay, it is now morally acceptable for her to turn him down.
Okay. Wow. She's so into morals. Okay. So he's already gone. She doesn't have to worry about that. And then they're in love. Oh.
And they explain everything. She gets to explain that she never really cared about her cousin, and he gets to explain that he never really cared about Louisa.
It's a little harsh, to be honest.
It is. There's definitely some details of the ending that I think we'll like dig in more when we get to parsing out the texts and contexts section of this, but like they get to just kind of be like, oh my God, I love you. I've always loved you. And then they get married. I mean, they don't actually get married on the page, but the beginning of the final chapter. And this to me is one of my favorite things because bearing in mind that this was Jane Austen's last work, she says, who can be in doubt of what followed? When any two young people take it into their heads to marry, they are pretty sure by perseverance to carry their point, be they ever so poor, ever so imprudent, or ever so little likely to be necessary to each other's ultimate comfort. This may be bad morality to conclude with, but I believe it to be truth. And if such parties succeed, how should a Captain Wentworth and an Anne Elliot, with the advantage of maturity of mind, consciousness of right, and one independent fortune between them, fail of bearing down every opposition?
Oh, that's extremely romantic.
I know, right?
She's using the first person? Like, this is Jane Austen talking about her opinion.
This is Jane Austen narrator. And I love that this may be bad morality, but I believe it to be the truth.
I know, like, finally, yes.
It's lovely. These two people deserve each other.
Yeah.
And so that, in the broadest strokes I could manage without leaving out any really important details, that is Jane Austen's 1818 Persuasion.
Beautiful.
So
It's extremely tension-filled.
it's very tense and very longing-y. Everything is tension and longing.
Which I mean, Jane Austen.
Yes, that's what she's best at. And you and I are going to get back together to
Yeah.
discuss some of the whys of it all, not just the whats of it all.
Okay.
But for today, I think we're done with the whats of it all.
Yeah, you have painted me a picture, and now we get to dissect it.
Yeah, I love dissecting pictures.
Right. It's a flawless metaphor. No confusion, no errors.
So, Kayleigh, anything you would like to, is there anywhere you would like to be found?
I mean, I'm on the internet. You can search my name and I'll have a Twitter, and I am broadly in between things. Yeah, I don't know what to say.
That's fair. Many of us are broadly between things. I'm between a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I can
Just
be
broads between things.
we're just some broads between some stuff. And we'll be back quite soon to talk all about Jane and how much we love her and all the really clever things she did here. And finally, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use it.
Yes.
Thanks for being with us this week, my loves. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kayleigh Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at didn'treaditpod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
Our closing music for this episode is Stolen Moments by Salon Dijon, because it reminded us of, like, every Jane Austen film adaptation in the best way.